Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. We're cracking open a book today that's practically hardwired into our cultural DNA. George Orwell's 1984.
And even if you haven't had a chance to read it cover to cover, you definitely know the lingo. Big Brother Thought Police.
Right. It's almost impossible to escape.
Mhm.
But today, we're going beyond the buzzwords.
We're digging into why this book, written decades ago, still feels so relevant, so unnervingly close to home in the 21st century.
And Orwell wastes no time yanking you into this world. Like, sentence one, bam! It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13.
Talk about setting the tone. It's just off-kilter enough to make you go, hold on, what?
Right, like since when do clocks go to 13? And that feeling, that subtle sense of wrongness, that's just the beginning.
Because then you get those posters plastered everywhere. Big Brother staring down at you with that caption. Big Brother is watching you.
It's like something out of a bad dream, those eyes following you everywhere.
It's deliberate. Orwell masterfully creates this atmosphere of paranoia and constant surveillance. You can almost feel the weight of it, right?
Absolutely. No wonder our main character, Winston, feels so compelled to rebel, even if it's just by secretly scribbling in a diary.
Which, by the way, that first diary entry is a doozy. He describes watching a propaganda film. A warship packed with refugees gets bombed, and people are cheering. A man's being hunted down by a helicopter.
Oh, I remember that scene. Just awful.
And he talks about how people were laughing as the man was being gunned down.
It's a brutal illustration of how the party controls people, not just through information, but by twisting their emotions.
Exactly. They've desensitized people to violence, even turned it into a form of entertainment.
So let's delve into how this society actually functions. You've got the party, with Big Brother at the helm, and these four ministries: love, truth, peace, plenty.
On the surface, they almost sound pleasant.
Right, almost.
But that's classic Orwell. He's using satire. Each ministry is responsible for the opposite of what its name implies.
Okay, yeah. Like the Ministry of Love is all about torture and repression. Not very loving.
Exactly. And the Ministry of Truth. They churn out propaganda and rewrite history to fit the party line.
It's terrifying. And the thing is, this kind of manipulation, it's not limited to the world of 1984, is it? Think about regimes throughout history.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it? Claiming to act out of love for the nation while committing atrocities.
It makes you think. And then there's those telescreens.
Ah, yes. Those ubiquitous two-way televisions.
Broadcasting propaganda 24/7, watching your every move.
In every home, every room, you can't escape them. It's that constant surveillance that creates this oppressive atmosphere. Like you can't breathe, you can't think.
And in the middle of all this, you have Winston, desperate for some kind of truth, some way to push back against the party's control. Remember that line from his diary?
Oh yeah. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4.
So simple, but in Oceania, even basic math is under attack.
Because if the party can convince you that 2 + 2 = 5, well, they can convince you of anything.
Which brings us to one of the most unsettling parts of 1984.
Doublethink.
Ah, yes, doublethink. Orwell describes it as the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them.
It's mind-bending. But it's how the party controls reality itself. You force people to accept contradictions, and suddenly, their ability to think critically, it just crumbles.
And it's everywhere in Oceania. The party's slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Pure doublethink.
And it's not just a fictional device either. Think about how often we see this in the real world.
Oh, all the time. Politicians contradicting themselves, making promises they can't keep.
Exactly. It's all designed to make us doubt ourselves, to make us question our own sanity.
It's like if you're constantly being bombarded with conflicting information, how can you possibly know what's true?
You start to doubt your own perceptions, your own memories. And that's exactly what the party wants.
And Orwell doesn't just tell us about it, he shows us how this manipulation works. Like with Winston's job at the Ministry of Truth.
Where he literally rewrites history.
Right. Altering records, doctoring photos, even changing the words people spoke in the past to fit the party's narrative.
It makes you wonder about our own sources of information, doesn't it? If history can be so easily manipulated, what can we truly trust?
Exactly. And then there's Winston's relationship with Julia. On the surface, she's a model party member, works in the fiction department.
But underneath, she's just as disillusioned as Winston.
And their love affair. It becomes this act of defiance against the party's control.
It's a really powerful statement about the human spirit. Even in this oppressive, dehumanizing society, They find solace and connection in each other.
They even find a little haven, a room above Mr. Charrington's shop.
Ah, yes, a little slice of the past.
Right. Filled with antiques, no telescreen, a place where they can almost forget, for a little while, about Big Brother.
And it's there that Winston gets his hands on that forbidden book.
Goldstein's The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism.
The book within the book. Classic Orwell.
And this book, it kind of blows Winston's mind, right? Because it lays bare the party's true nature. Explains how they use perpetual war and manufactured scarcity to maintain control.
How they manipulate language, history, everything to keep people in a constant state of fear.
It's like a light bulb goes off for Winston. He finally understands the system he's trapped in. But of course, being a dystopian novel, this being 1984, we know it can't last.
Of course not. Their little bubble of freedom, it's shattered. They get caught, arrested in that very room.
Betrayed by Mr. Charrington, no less. Turns out he's part of the thought police.
It's a heartbreaking betrayal, and it shows just how pervasive the party's power is. They were always watching, always listening.
And what happens to Winston next is truly horrifying. He's taken to the Ministry of Love, which, talk about irony.
Right, because the Ministry of Love is all about torture.
Physical and psychological.
Orwell doesn't hold back in his descriptions. The constant bright lights, the starvation, the beatings, it's brutal, dehumanizing.
And through it all, they're questioning him relentlessly, trying to break him down, make him renounce his own thoughts, his own beliefs.
And this is where things take an even darker turn. Because the party doesn't just want to control Winston's actions, they want to control his mind. And that's where Room 101 comes in.
Room 101, it's become this, universal symbol of terror, hasn't it? But what makes it so terrifying, it's not just about physical pain, right?
Not at all. It's about psychological torture. It's about shattering a person's will by exploiting their deepest, most primal fears.
It's like facing your worst nightmare, but it's real.
And in Winston's case, Room 101 contains rats.
Ugh, rats, which we know are his absolute biggest fear.
And Orwell's description of that scene, the cage being brought closer to Winston's face, his desperate pleas, it's just heart-wrenching.
It's awful. You just want to look away, but you can't.
And in that moment of pure terror, Winston breaks. He betrays everything he believed in, everything he felt for Julia.
He begs O'Brien to torture Julia instead of him.
It's a complete surrender, a betrayal of his own humanity.
And what's even more disturbing is that after all this, after being broken so completely, Winston is released back into the world.
That he's a shell of his former self.
Yeah.
His spirit is crushed. His love for Julia has been twisted into hatred.
And then that gut punch of a last line, he loved Big Brother, chilling.
It's a bleak ending, no doubt. But it perfectly illustrates the party's absolute power. They haven't just silenced Winston, they've reshaped his entire reality.
It's a stark warning about the dangers of totalitarianism. And it makes you wonder, is there any hope to be found in a story as bleak as 1984?
I think the hope lies in understanding Orwell's message. By exposing the tactics of totalitarian regimes, by showing us how they operate, he gives us a way to recognize and resist them in our own world.
It's that whole knowledge is power thing.
Exactly. The more we understand how manipulation works, how language can be twisted, how history can be rewritten, how fear can be used to control us, the better equipped we are to fight back.
So it's not just a dystopian novel, it's a call to action.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to cherish our freedoms, to question everything, to never stop fighting for a world where truth prevails.
Well said. And on that note, let me leave you with one final, slightly unsettling thought. Remember Room 101. What would your Room 101 be like? What's your deepest fear? It's not a fun question, but I think it's an important one to ask ourselves, because it reminds us of what's at stake and what we're fighting to protect. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into 1984. Until next time, keep those minds engaged.